Prep Test 73, Section 4, number 26. Crops genetically engineered to produce toxins that enable them to resist insect pests do not need to be sprayed with insecticides. Okay. Since excessive spraying of insecticides has harmed wildlife populations near croplands, using such genetically engineered crops more widely is likely to help wildlife populations recover. Wait a minute, I don't know. Because I get it that insecticides can harm wildlife populations. But these plants that reduce insect pests, they might be bad for wildlife populations too. I mean, how are they resisting these insect pests? What did you do when you genetically engineered them? They're producing toxins, it says. They're producing toxins that enable them to resist insect pests. Well, what if that gets in the water supply and kills the wildlife? Or what if the fact that they're killing off the insects then kills off everything else in the food chain? Or what if the bears are trying to eat the plants and the bears go into the blueberry field and eat those genetically engineered blueberry plants and die? There's a million ways where these genetically engineered to produce toxins plants could be worse for the wildlife populations than the status quo of spraying insecticides. So there's the problem there. Which one of the following is an assumption the farmer's argument requires? We're looking for which one, if false, will make the argument lose. A, use of crops that have been genetically engineered to reduce insect pests in place of crops that have been sprayed with insecticides will cause less harm to wildlife populations. If that's not true, the argument fails. This is another one of those where it looks like that's just what they said. It just feels like, well, yeah, that was their argument. Okay, yeah, well, when we negate that, then that means their argument sucks. So the opposite of A is just the opposite of what they're trying to say, and so A is a necessary assumption of the argument. B, wildlife populations that have been harmed by the excessive spraying of insecticides on croplands are likely to recover if the amount of insecticides sprayed on those croplands is reduced even slightly. Oh, no. That can be false without ruining the argument. Because you could just reduce it by 0.0001% and the wildlife populations don't recover. That doesn't ruin the argument. The argument depended on if we stop spraying insecticides totally, because we're going to use these genetically engineered crops and therefore not have to spray insecticides. If you use these crops, those plants do not need to be sprayed with insecticides. So that's talking about getting rid of the insecticides entirely in places where we use these genetically engineered plants. So the negation of B is too weak. When you negate B, it becomes, no, if you cut it down by like 1%, the wildlife doesn't come back. That doesn't hurt the argument, though, because we weren't talking about cutting it back by 1% and automatically having all the wildlife come back. B can be false without ruining the argument. A can't. That's why it's A. C, crops that have been genetically engineered to resist insect pests are never sprayed with insecticides that harm wildlife populations. If that's not true, then once in a while we might still spray these crops. That would be stupid of us, but I don't think that ruins this argument. Like, oh yeah, every once in a while we'll still spray, but we only spray one day a year instead of spraying 365 days a year. So we spray one day a year. That could still be okay for the local wildlife. Local wildlife would much prefer that we only spray one day a year than spray 365 days a year. Yeah, they don't need to be sprayed, But I spray every once in a while just because I don't like bugs or something. I don't know. C can be false without ruining the argument. D, use of crops that have been genetically engineered to resist insect pests is no more costly to farmers. Who cares if it is? That's not relevant. Price is not relevant here. The argument is only about if we do this, if we adopt this, is it going to be better for the wildlife? And saying, well, it's more or less expensive, that doesn't have any bearing. E, if a wider use of certain crops that have been genetically engineered to resist insect pests is likely to help at least some wildlife populations to recover, then yeah, I would stop reading that one, because the conditional in E is just like, if the conclusion of the argument is correct, that's not going to be something that's going to ruin the conclusion of the argument. So the answer for number 26 is A, because if it's false, it's going to make the argument lose.